Hello, everyone. Professor Fritz back again. And this week we're looking at a chapter from a book called No God But God by Reza Aslan. That chapter is called The City of the Prophet. And, sorry, I had to check my notes a second. So let's go forward. So I want to say, first of all, that most of the work in our course covers the cultural traditions that form the basis of our own society. A society comes out of Europe, as you know. Western society is there's competing stories here, but there's one story that's a common story is that, European culture came over to the United States, right? And that's an extension of that. A lot of our traditions come from that culture. Like, for instance, the primary language here, English, comes from England, right? That's in Europe. But that's not the only influence. And in fact, and in Europe itself, that's not has influences that come from the outside. And so it's worth looking at some of those influences. And one of them is Islamic society, right? So because all societies are deeply influential to the other. But one for us, the big one was Islamic society, which was a huge civilization covering a huge area, a larger area than Europe, and was a major influence on European thinking, right? So what I want to say is much of Western knowledge is derived from what we learn from Islamic societies. For example, the idea of algebra. Algebra is actually based on an Arabic word. And so, and also the concept of zero. I mean, the idea of the number zero, the idea of nothing, as a calculating term, didn't come into European mathematics until the 12th century. So you can see some fundamentally important ideas come from Islamic thinkers and have come into European society, right? So I thought for this week, then we should take a look at a text that at least itself studies a small part of Islamic history. And that's what Reza Aslan does. So Dr. Reza Aslan, the author of this book, is an acclaimed religious scholar. His first book, and this is his first book, the book No God But God, from which this chapter is taken, was published in 2005. So he's had a few books since then. So he's a very active scholar, right? And his focus in this particular book is the historical origins of Islam and how Islam itself has evolved over the centuries, right? So the chapter you're reading, The City of the Prophet, I see I have a typo there, The City of the Prophet, covers a particularly significant moment in Islamic history, the founding of what might be called the first true Islamic city. It wasn't much of a city, but the basic idea stands. So um, according to this history of the period, Muhammad comes from Mecca. He's rejected actually from Mecca, and so he and his followers leave, and they go to a little village that's somewhat south of in the desert there, south of Mecca, a town that is comes to be known as Medina, but is actually not called that yet. So they go there and they start building a community for themselves. This is early in their history, right? So this is a very important event. It's sort of like it's like almost like a colony, right? Finding your own colony, a beginning of a whole society, right? If you go back in time. So the question is, if the why is this is so important, right? Because the groundwork for what all Islamic societies all over the world might look like, and what's possible and what's not possible, comes from this early period. This tiny little moment in history has an influence on all these societies across the whole world of Islamic societies, right? So that's why it's worth knowing. And now this chapter will talk about that community and how it was built. It will also, one dimension it will spend some time talking about is the role of women in Islam. That's always a touch point or a struggle for people in the West. They always want to like judge Islam by how it treats its women. So Aslan wants to address that. He faces that concept head on. Where do these ideas come from about women? What was it like in the original society? How has it changed? So you want to keep an eye on that when you read this chapter. So keep in mind that Aslan isn't writing about what we think we already know, right? He's not going to tell us what we think we know. As a writer, he wants to show us something that we haven't seen or haven't realized. So pay attention to like, what do I think is true? And now what is he telling me? All right. What do I assume that I know? Now what is he telling me? Keep those 2 points in mind. They'll be contrasted probably. Keep those two views in mind. What do I think I know? What is he showing me? Keep those in mind as you read the book. All right. And address the questions that go into the discussion forum. Okay. Well, that's everything. Best of luck to you.